In this video I'm playing in the round 4 of 2022 Summer 1v1 Risk Elo tournament with the 23rd ladder opponent Nuclear Demonstration, with myself currently being in the 20th position. We will be playing 4 games on Roman Empire World Domination and 4 games on Europe Zombie Apocalypse. Each of us has to go first and second the same amount of times on both of the maps. This is how our territory setup looked in the first game, and I decided to place my whole army in this territory, so to go for that small 2 territory continent and then depending on my opponent's troop placement to expand to that big 2 border continent as well. And my opponent put his army in this territory, as I guess he probably expected me placing my army in this territory. But that wasn't my plan, and with that I've got a very favorable opportunity to end up holding both of those continents. After capturing the smaller one I expanded to the bigger one and split my armies in the way to properly guard both of the borders. My opponent tried doing manual rolls with his newly gotten troops, but they just went terribly, and with me receiving all of those troop bonuses, I was in a dominating position in which it wasn't possible for my opponent to make a comeback. I win and the result after the first game becomes 1-0. This is how our territory setup looked in the second game. And evaluating situation I decided that probably the best decision for me would be to go with 2 army splits. And my opponent decided to put his army in this territory, which was pretty expected for me. I thought that he will either put his army in this territory, so to be accessible to capture all of the top territories in the left side and the middle, so except this one, but being accessible to cover this territory as well, or that he would try going for this one border continent. My opponent went with the first option and it was super good for me because he wasn't accessible to either of the armies. He also took a lot of time to make his turn, and at the end ran out of time to fortify his biggest army from the blocked place. So then, I invaded him into his small continent with newly gotten troops without unleashing his army, and then with my other armies I invaded him into his other continents and captured a bunch of territories. Though that was a mistake for me to leave 2 troops behind here, as at the end I've got a bad blitz roll to finish capturing this continent. But with my opponent's biggest army being blocked he wasn't able to recapture that much stuff, and I received even 6 troops. As you saw in my turn I ended up capturing these 2 continents, and my opponent in his turn then got very unlucky blitz rolls which managed him into not invading me into any of them, so that was super unlucky for my opponent. After 2 games, the result becomes 3-0 with me increasing the lead. This is how our territory setup looked in the 3rd game, and I decided to place my army in this territory, as it was pretty much covering all of my opponent's counter-attacking places. And my opponent decided to go with 2 army splits, placing one of his armies here, and another army here. So I crushed the accessible army, and then obviously just left the other one blocked. It wouldn't have made me much sense to unleash it. So I captured this 2 border continent, and then proceeded to attacking a bunch of territories which at the end led me of capturing that small 2 territory continent too. My opponent in his turn invaded me into the biggest continent, but I still managed to hold the smaller one, plus I was at 24 territories to receive a territorial troop bonus, so the game was won for me. After 3 games the result becomes 4-0 with me increasing the lead. This is how our territory setup looked in the 4th game, and this territory was very obvious spot for my opponent to put his army to, as it was covering the most of territories, so seeing that I saw this territory as a very good place to add my army to. This is what happened, and my opponent in his turn went to capture as many territories as possible, though running out of time again. So I went to capture as many territories as possible without unleashing my opponent's army towards myself, and captured both of 2 continents, so I would have a high chance to hold at least one of them. My opponent added his troops to try invading it, and getting to my 3 troop army he got super lucky manual rolls to win the 3 versus 3 attack, and then he was lucky to win the 2 versus 1 attack 2 to break into my big continent, which was even worth 5 troops. So with my opponent still having an 11 troops army and capturing a bunch of territories, that basically ruined all of my chances to make a comeback. After 4 games the result becomes 4-1 with my opponent scoring his first point. Moving on, this is the first Europe Zombie Apocalypse game or the 5th game, and overall, my opponent had multiple places to add his army to, so by not wanting to risk to not predicting my opponent's stack and being able to capture a lot of territories, I decided that I will rather put my army in the place which would let me capture as many territories in a straight line as possible without me needing to do troop splits. After the reveal I wasn't connecting my opponent's biggest army like I predicted, so I added my newly gotten troops next to it and started doing manual rolls, but unfortunately I lost 2 troops on them, and then with my biggest army I just went to capture as many territories in a straight line as possible like I was planning to. Then at the end fortifying my unused troops next to my opponent. Unluckily for my opponent, he wasn't favored by the attacker's advantage, losing the same number of troops as me on blitz roll. And then also he wiped out zombies, which was very good for me because I was in the territorial advantage, and without the zombies nobody was going to prevent that from happening. As being in the territorial advantage, I was just going to capitalize on my advantage in every turn, capturing as many territories as possible with the gotten troops. So to increase it even more, in the 3rd round zombies infected one of my territories, so to prevent them from multiplying and with the time growing strong, I immediately wiped them out, as without the zombies in the game I was clearly going to win the game. So it was in my best interest to not let them reborn, as otherwise with them taking lots of territories the game could have eventually become into 50-50 situation or something like that. So whenever zombies kept respawning and infecting territories, I just had to immediately wipe them out. It didn't matter that I had to use my own troops on them at all, as I was going to sustain my advantage anyway, so I just kept repeating the same until eventually I wiped out my opponent completely and won. After 5 games the result becomes 5-1 with me increasing the lead. This is how our territory setup looked in the 6th game, and with the reveal my opponent ended up predicting my army correctly. So obviously he went to blitz it, and with that he got the attacker's advantage of 7 troops, so he was in a very good situation immediately. I recaptured the territories I could, and then luckily or unluckily the zombies went to capture lots of territories, luckily because it highly minimized my opponent's territories, and unluckily because he didn't waste that 9 troops army in his turn, meaning that he could now use it on capturing the important to him territories, and obviously he went to capture the British Empire having enough troops to properly guard both of his borders. I could have of course tried my luck to break through one of his borders, but I would have needed an extremely good luck, but even if I had gotten it, the game would have still been lost to me. So I decided to rather go for the hiding strategy, adding my troops to that spot. Then I also had the hiding spot in the Russian Empire, but my opponent very quickly wiped these troops out. So I was left with only one spot. My strategy was to wait till the sets get extremely big, as otherwise I didn't really see the way to win this game. So unless my opponent making a mistake and instead of like expanding to the French Empire, which was extremely good with this blizzard, trying to go for the hunt to find me and at the end failing it. And this is what actually and very luckily for me happened. My opponent found my stack, but even if he has successfully blitzed it, I still had a smaller 4 troops hiding army a couple of territories behind. Then to not reveal my hiding spot I decided to add my newly gotten troops to that blitzed my army and risk it being eaten by zombies. This is what unfortunately happened, but at least I didn't reveal my other hiding spot from my opponent. I lost troops, but at the end I didn't really care that much at all, as the most important thing was that my opponent wasn't holding the British Empire anymore. I knew that because after the unsuccessful hunt, he started to only receive 3 troops per turn like me. So from my perspective the game turned into 50-50. Or might even with me being of the advantage, though I had no idea where my opponent was exactly hiding, so after trading an ace set at 3 cards I just captured 1 territory to not risk wasting my troops for nothing. And then in this turn capturing that zombie territory I found out that my opponent was lurking secretly close to me, and with my army being bigger I obviously blitzed it. I didn't know if my opponent had some troops with a hiding spot elsewhere, and I knew that if these one-troop territories are his last ones, then the zombies were going to wipe them out anyway. So I don't have to waste my troops, and this is what exactly happened. My opponent was completely wiped out by the zombies before his own turn even coming. I win and the result becomes 7-1 with me increasing the lead. My opponent decides to surrender the last 2 games, and with that the official result becomes 9-1 with me winning the series. Here's the end of the second round, and from the 20th place I ranked up to the 6th one, and here are also 32 people who advanced to the next round. It's player limitation. Now if you're interested in checking out the full tournament series, then click on the playlist at the top right, and if you're interested in watching more 1v1 competitions in general, then click on the playlist at the bottom right.